There's a carbon typescript in the records of the Historical Division, Headquarters United States Army Europe. 189 pages, translated from the German, catalogued in the Foreign Military Studies series as Manuscript B151A. The subject is the 5th Panzer Army in the Ardennes. The author is the man who commanded it, Hasso Eckhard Freiherr von Manteuffel, General der Panzertruppe. The series began with an earlier manuscript, B151, written at Allendorf in September of 1946, while its author was in American custody. That is the first American assessment of Manteuffel, and it is neither a compliment nor an insult. It is a procurement decision. The Historical Division wanted the Ardennes reconstructed from the German side, and of the 3 Army commanders who attacked on the morning of December 16th, 1944, the one they sat down at a desk to write the operational account was the one whose army had gone furthest. The second American assessment is in the official history. Hugh Cole wrote The Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge, for the United States Army in World War II series, and Cole is exact about the German design. The 6th Panzer Army, he writes, in Hitler's mind and in OKW plans, represented the main effort, and its 4 SS Panzer divisions were expected to pace the entire counteroffensive. Then he records what the main effort actually did. In the 6th Panzer Army sector, Cole writes, the German staffs had expected that the infantry assault would penetrate to a depth of 3 to 5 miles by noon. That objective was not achieved. And he records the deepest German penetration of the entire offensive, about 60 airline miles. It was not made by the SS Panzer divisions. It was made in Manteuffel's sector, and at the tip of it, on the night of December 23rd, a reconnaissance battalion and a part of a German artillery column bivouacked near Foy-Notre-Dame, 4 or 5 miles from the bridges at Dinant. That is the comparison. 2 armies attacking side by side on the same morning, into the same forest, against the same American corps. One of them was designated the main effort and was resourced accordingly, in armor, in artillery, in fuel priority, and in replacements. The other was built around a headquarters that in September had been, in Cole's phrase, little more than an army headquarters and a few army troops. The weaker one got further, not marginally further. One of these 2 armies put a battle group in the fields short of the Meuse bridges. The other never reached the river. Autumn 1944 on the Western Front was a season of stalled attacks. Aachen had fallen in October after weeks of house fighting. In the Hurtgen Forest, the American First Army was feeding divisions into a wood line and getting them back as cadres. The port of Antwerp was in Allied hands, but the Scheldt approaches had to be cleared before a single ton could be landed, and the first convoy did not reach the quays until the end of November. Behind the German line, a rebuild was underway that had nothing to do with the fighting at Aachen. On September 13th, as Cole records it, the SS Panzer divisions in the west were ordered out of the line and turned over to a new army headquarters, that of the 6th Panzer Army. The commander was SS Oberstgruppenführer and General Oberst of the Waffen-SS Josef Dietrich, called Sepp, a man whose career ran from the Leibstandarte bodyguard to army command without a staff college anywhere in it. The 5th Panzer Army existed on the same map. It was, in Cole's description of that autumn, little more than an army headquarters and a few army troops, and it would be beefed up and handed to a new commander-in-chief. That commander was Manteuffel. He was born in Potsdam on January 14th, 1897, into a Prussian family that Peter Caddick Adams, in Snow and Steel, traces back to the 13th century. Caddick Adams also gives the physical detail that everyone who met him mentions. He stood about 5 feet 3, and he was reputed to be the shortest officer in the German army. He had commanded the Grossdeutschland division on the Eastern Front. Hitler promoted him General der Panzertruppe on the 1st of September 1944 and gave him an army 11 days later on the 12th. He had never commanded a corps. Over him stood Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt at OB West, whose involvement in what followed was largely nominal, and Field Marshal Walter Model at Army Group B, whose involvement was not. The force that was supposed to fill these 2 armies kept changing size on paper. Cole tracks it. Hitler personally promised 30 divisions, of which 12 were to be armored. By the 1st of November, the Hitler and Jodl estimate had risen to 39 divisions, of which 13 would be armored. The list that finally went out named 4 armies, 11 Army Corps, and 38 divisions, with 9 Volks Artillery Corps and 7 Volks Werfer brigades behind them. None of those lists is the army that crossed the start line. The ground they were given is the other half of the story. The Ardennes is a plateau cut by river gorges running mostly north to south, which means an attack going west crosses every one of them at right angles. From the German line, the sequence is the Auer, then the Klurf, then the Aurith, then the Meuse. Cole notes that the Meuse, though shallow, averages a width of 120 yards in its main course. Between those rivers, the roads run through villages with single stone bridges and hairpin approaches, and in December they were sheeted first in mud and then in ice. Facing them, the American VIII Corps held a front that had been deliberately thinned to feed the offensives north and south. The 106th Infantry Division had been in the line 5 days. Cole gives its sector, with the 14th Cavalry Group attached, as approximately 18 airline miles, and then adds the sentence that matters. When traced on the ground, the line these forces were responsible for defending was actually more than 21 miles in length. The 28th Infantry Division to the south had come out of the Hurtgen with its rifle companies rebuilt around replacements. Both divisions were where they were because the Ardennes was where you put a division that needed to recover. The plan came from OKW, and it came with a fixed end state. Cole sets out the argument that ran through October and into December as a choice between what the German staffs called the big solution and the small solution. The big solution meant Antwerp and the encirclement and destruction of the Allied forces north of the line Bastogne, Brussels, Antwerp. The small solution meant Liège and the envelopment of the enemy forces east of the Meuse. Hitler, Cole writes, ridiculed the small solution as nothing but a half measure. Antwerp stayed in the orders until the end. The first object, for both panzer armies, was bridgeheads over the Meuse between Liège and Namur. Thereafter, Antwerp. Manteuffel's own account of his orders is in the Historical Division manuscript, and it is worth taking at its own word because it is unusually specific about the shape of the thing. His army was to cross the Maas, the Meuse, between Amay and Namur, and along the line Antwerp, Brussels, Namur, Dinant, to prevent the activity of the reserves. Reduced to its function, Dietrich was to take Antwerp, and Manteuffel was to hold open the southern shoulder of the corridor Dietrich would drive through while getting his own bridgeheads over the same river. There is one line in Cole that frames the whole allocation, and it is easy to read past. The attack front assigned the 6th Panzer Army, Monschau to Krewinkel, was narrower than that of its southern partner. More divisions, more guns, more armor, and less ground to cover with them. Manteuffel had 3 corps for the wider front. On the right, the 66th Corps under General der Artillerie Walter Lücht, with 2 infantry formations, the 18th Volksgrenadier Division under General Major Hoffmann Schönborn, and the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division under General Major Friedrich Kittel. Cole notes that the 62nd bore the number of a division destroyed on the Eastern Front, that it had been rebuilt from the ground up, that it had never before been in action, and that its commander likewise lacked combat experience. Lücht's task was to pinch off the American division on the Schnee Eifel and take St. Vith. In the center, the 58th Panzer Corps under General der Panzertruppe Walter Krüger, with the 116th Panzer Division under General Major Siegfried von Waldenberg, and the 560th Volksgrenadier Division under Colonel Rudolf Langhäuser. Krüger was to cross the Auer at Auren and run west through Hufeleis. On the left, the 47th Panzer Corps under General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz, promoted to that rank on the 1st of November, 6 weeks before the attack. He had the 2nd Panzer Division under Colonel Meinrad von Lauchert, who took the division over on December 15th, the day before the offensive, the Panzer Lehr Division under General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division under Colonel Heinz Kokott. Lüttwitz was to cross the Auer at Dasburg and Gemünd, break the American regiment on the Klurf, and take Bastogne on the way past. Manteuffel did not accept the plan as drafted. On December 2nd, he went to Hitler's headquarters and argued for changes at the tactical level, and he got 3 of them. The artillery preparation came down from 3.5 hours to 90 minutes, and the jump-off moved from 0730 hours to 0530 hours, in darkness. Small storm detachments were authorized to infiltrate American positions ahead of the main assault rather than wait behind a barrage, a method both sides had been using in the east for years, and searchlight batteries were authorized to bounce their beams off the cloud base to light the ground for the infantry. Those were not staff college abstractions. Caddick Adams records how he arrived at them. Manteuffel put on the uniform of a Wehrmacht infantry colonel and went forward with front-line units that patrolled into American territory. And what he found was a routine. The American outposts manned their foxholes from an hour before dawn, and after dark they went back to warm buildings. At night, the positions were empty. 0530 hours, December 16th. Along the 5th Panzer Army front, the guns opened, and where Manteuffel had asked for silence, there was silence. Company K of the 110th Infantry, holding Hosingen, reported that the entire German line ahead of them was a series of pinpoints of light in the seconds before the shells arrived. The barrage cut the forward telephone lines and did comparatively little else. On Lucht's front, north of the Schnee Eifel, the villages the assault was going through were deliberately left unshelled. That is where the first day was won. The 18th Volksgrenadier Division attacked concentrically, north and south of the Schnee Eifel, through the gap Manteuffel had identified, and did not stop to fight the Americans on the high ground at all. By 8:45 hours on the 17th, the bridge at Schönberg was in German hands. At nightfall on the 17th, the trap closed behind the two regiments of the 106th Infantry Division on the ridge. On the 19th, out of ammunition and out of options, roughly 7,000 men of the 422nd and 423rd Infantry surrendered on the Schnee Eifel. On Luttwitz's front, the same morning went differently, and the reason is worth stating precisely because it is the kind of thing that decides operations. At Dasburg, where the 2nd Panzer Division was to cross the Our, the demolition key for the Siegfried Line obstacles on the German side could not be found. Major Georg Lew's 600th Bridging Battalion had to blow the obstacles after the bombardment had already started, and the bridge was not finished until 1600 hours, in the last of the light. Then the 11th Tank across misjudged the approach, went through a span, and drowned its driver. Repairs took 3 hours. At Gmünd, where Panzerlehr was to cross, the bridge was ready at about 1800 hours. So, on the first night of an operation whose whole premise was speed, the armored divisions of the 47th Panzer Corps were still largely on the German bank. Only reconnaissance elements had crossed. Caddick Adams totals the cost of the missing key, the drowned tank, the slow bridging, and the American infantry, who would not leave Marnac and Hosingen at roughly 1 full day before the Corps reached the Klurf, let alone Bastogne. Colonel Hurley Fuller's 110th Infantry spent that day and the next being destroyed in place, company by company, in villages that no longer had a front. Fuller ran his regiment from a hotel in Clairvaux until the tanks came through the town. Kruger's corps in the center had it worse. His crossing sites at Lutzkampen and Aurin did not work. The 116th Panzer Division could not get its weight over the Our where it had been told to, and had to backtrack and go through Dasburg on somebody else's bridge, which put a Panzer Division into the traffic stream of the Corps next door on the one night when that traffic stream was the operation. Now hold all of that against the north, where the resources were. The 6th Panzer Army had the narrower attack front and the heavier artillery. Its assault infantry was supposed to open a hole 3 to 5 miles deep by noon on the first day for the armor to pass through. Cole's verdict on that is flat. This objective was not achieved. The assault to punch a hole at Losheim went so slowly that the spearhead armor of the 1st SS Panzer Division was delayed at its line of departure for at least 6 hours longer than anticipated. When that spearhead did get moving, under SS Standartenführer Joachim Peiper, it went hard and it went west. Between noon and 1 o'clock on December 17th, on the road between Motorsheide and Ligneville, the column killed American prisoners at a crossroads outside Malmedy. Cole's figure in the official history is at least 86. The column kept moving. That evening it was heading for Werbemont, and it did not get there. By the night of December 18th, the shape of the offensive was already the reverse of the shape on the plan. The main effort was stalled in the Amblève Valley behind blown bridges and a road net it could not use. The supporting attack had swallowed an American division whole and had 2 Panzer Corps across the Our. Quick note before the next part. Manteuffel is one of the 50 in the book our team put together. Commanders, admirals, and airmen, same entry each time, final rank, commands, operations, decorations, fate, then what the record holds against what was claimed. 824 licensed photographs, and a separate color volume carrying 746 of them. GermanCommand.com, back to the Ardennes. December 19th is the day the offensive stopped being a plan and became a race between 2 road networks. At St. Vith, Brigadier General Bruce Clark of Combat Command B, 7th Armored Division, had put a horseshoe of armor and engineers east of the town on the night of the 17th. Model had ordered Manteuffel to take St. Vith on the 18th. Lucht's corps could not do it. The Volksgrenadiers were still busy reducing the Schnee Eifel pocket, and the roads behind them were jammed with the follow on traffic of an army trying to move 3 corps down a handful of usable routes. Into that came the Führer Begleit Brigade under Colonel Otto Remmer, an OKW reserve formation released to Manteuffel, and pushed under Lucht's corps to add weight where the weight had run out. Cole records what it produced on the 20th. Reimer sent a tank company through Ober-Emmels in the afternoon fog, and American 90mm tank destroyers of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion knocked out all 4 Panthers. Reimer decided to wait for the rest of his brigade. St. Vith fell on the 21st. The final attack opened at 1500 hours with heavy artillery. At 1700 hours, 6 Tiger II tanks of the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion came up the Primmerberg into Clark's positions, and at about 21:30 hours, Clark ordered the withdrawal. The town the Germans had wanted by the evening of December 17th was theirs on the evening of December 21st. Meanwhile, Luttwitz had reached Bastogne and found the 101st Airborne Division in it. Most of you know the Bastogne story from the American side. The part that belongs in this comparison is the German decision. Luttwitz did not have the strength to storm the town and continue west at the same time, and Manteuffel's mission was not Bastogne, it was the Meuse, so the town was masked. Kokot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division and elements of Panzer Lehr were left to close the ring, and the 2nd Panzer Division was sent round the north of Bastogne and turned west. Getting round it cost a day. Cole has the 2nd Panzer Division leading the 47th Panzer Corps, colliding with the Neuville defenses early on the 19th, and the capture of Neuville during the afternoon of the 20th, freeing the division to continue the advance toward the Meuse. Neuville sits about 5 miles north of Bastogne. The best armored division in Manteuffel's army spent 2 days getting past a village on its own flank. On December 22nd, Luttwitz sent in the surrender demand. The document is short and formal. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation, it reads, and that is the honorable surrender of the encircled town. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's written reply was one word. The officer who handed it back translated it for the German party as "go to hell." The ring closed, anyway. By midday on the 21st, all 7 highways into Bastogne were cut, and the 7 highways are the point. Every one of them ran through the town, which meant that from the 21st onward, Manteuffel's deepest thrust was being supplied around an American garrison sitting on its own supply route. Cole puts it without emphasis. Luttwitz's corps was having trouble bringing gasoline forward on the crowded, winding supply roads in its sector. North of that, Kruger's 58th Panzer Corps was making its own run. Waldenberg's 116th Panzer came west through Houffalize, then Samray, then La Roche, and reached Hotten and Verdun. At Verdun it was turned back. That was its furthest advance in the Ardennes, which leaves Locher. The 2nd Panzer Division came out of the Bastogne corridor onto the Ourthe and took the crossing at Orteville, where one of the main 8th Corps supply roads, the Bastogne to Marche to Namur highway, ran over the western branch of the river on a heavy Bailey bridge, an American bridge on an American supply road, taken intact and used to move a German Panzer Division west. Then the division stopped because it had to. When daylight came, Cole writes, the 2nd Panzer Division was bunched up in an assembly area with its head across the river near Tenneville, and its rear guard arrayed to meet a counterattack from Bastogne near Salle. A division facing 2 ways at once with its fuel columns somewhere behind it on the Bastogne roads. The Americans used that pause. On the night of December 20th, 2 hours before midnight, the leading troops of the 84th Infantry Division entered Marche. In the small dark hours of the 21st, while that regiment was outposting the town and bedding down in it, the advance guard of the 2nd Panzer Division bivouacked on the west bank of the Ourthe, 15 miles away. Neither knew the other was there. The same morning, Major General J. Lawton Collins reported to Hodges and took over a corps that did not yet exist on the ground. The 7th Corps had been carrying the left wing of the Rower River offensive. It was now pulled out, given the 84th Infantry Division, and then given the 2nd Armored Division out of 9th Army Reserve on a suggestion from Montgomery's staff. That armored division closed into its assembly area before midnight. So by the early hours of December 21st, on the ground Manteuffel intended to cross, there was an American infantry division in march, an American armored division moving in behind it, and a corps headquarters with a reputation for speed running both. Ahead of the German spearhead, the Meuse itself was being closed. The British commander undertook emergency measures to bar the Meuse crossings between Liège and Givet, while the 30 Corps made its move. The 29th Armored Brigade, which was in western Belgium in the middle of re-equipping, was ordered to pick its old tanks back up and hurry to the Namur and Dinant sector. Men who had handed in their tanks a few days earlier drove them to the river. By December 23rd, the 2nd Panzer Division was strung out for miles, its fuel columns behind it, its flanks open on both sides, and its 2 leading battle groups ahead of everything else in the German army. Kampfgruppe von Böhm, built on the reconnaissance battalion, reached Foy-Notre-Dame at midnight on the 23rd. Kampfgruppe von Koschenhausen, under Major Ernst von Koschenhausen, with a tank battalion and a regiment of Panzer grenadiers, halted at daylight in the woods southwest of Koneu, and then came up around Chelles. They were, at that moment, 4 or 5 miles from the bridges at Dinant, and the ground between them and the river was held by a scratch force. British armor of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment and infantry of the 8th Rifle Brigade were on the east bank. There was a joint Anglo-American checkpoint at the Rocher-Bayard, the rock gate on the road south of Dinant. They did not attack. Cole is careful about why, and the sentence deserves quoting because it is the whole answer. It is known that Koschenhausen's tanks had very little gasoline, probably not enough to permit any appreciable skirmishing or tactical movement. All through the 24th, Koschenhausen's radio traffic back to the division told the same story. Bitter fighting, heavy losses to Allied aircraft and tanks, dwindling ammunition, and no fuel. Behind him, Lauschert had worked out what was going to happen and asked for permission to pull the forward detachment back. Cole's line is that at first, Luttwitz would not listen to the importunate Lauschert, and then adds the sentence that explains the whole German command system in December of 1944. The decision as to which direction the 5th Panzer would throw its weight obviously had to be made by Hitler himself. The weather had cleared on the 23rd. That mattered more than any single German decision in the last week of the month. The day came bright and clear, Cole writes, bringing the American and British air forces into the skies over the Bulge in one of the greatest demonstrations of tactical ground support ever witnessed. From the 23rd, the fighter-bombers could see the roads, and the roads were where the German fuel was. On Christmas morning, Major General Ernest Harman's 2nd Armored Division attacked from the north with Combat Command B at 0800 hours, a double-pronged sweep to take Celles and close on the German armor in the woods between Celles and Conjou. The tanks that went into Celles met little resistance. The 82nd Reconnaissance Battalion ran into what was left of the 2nd Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion at Foy-Notre-Dame, and British armor shot up the survivors around Sorine. That skirmish, Cole writes, marked the end of the German Reconnaissance Battalion. Its commander and 147 others were captured. On Lauchert's left, Bayerlane's Panzer Lehr had come down onto the Dinant to Rochefort Highway and taken Rochefort itself. That is the only reason the survivors of the Celles pocket had anywhere to walk to. Koschenhausen got out on foot. He and nearly 600 of his men reached Rochefort without their tanks. A Panzer Lehr attempt to reach the pocket by way of Custine on the 26th failed for the same reason everything else was failing by then, and it is the last thing that division did going west. By the evening of December 26th, in Cole's assessment, the initiative had passed from German to American hands. The same day, Patton's 4th Armored Division made contact with the Bastogne perimeter, the first tank reaching the lines of the 326th Engineers at about 1650 hours. The hinge of this battle is not Celles. Celles is where the arithmetic came due. The hinge is Bastogne, and specifically the decision to go past it. That decision is usually described as a choice between speed and security. It was not. It was a choice between 2 impossibilities. Bastogne is a road hub because the Ardennes gives you no alternative. 7 paved highways converge there. An army moving west from the Our on a December road surface with tracked vehicles burning fuel at rates no staff table had ever modeled either owns that junction or it moves its fuel, its ammunition, its bridging, its recovery vehicles, and its artillery around it on farm tracks, under an air force that, from the 23rd, could see every one of them. Manteuffel had the strength to take Bastogne or the strength to reach the Meuse. He did not have the strength to do both, and the plan he had been given required both, because the Meuse crossing was his mission, and Bastogne was simply in the way of it. He chose the mission. 2nd Panzer went west, and that decision produced the deepest German penetration of the war in the West since 1940. It also guaranteed that the penetration would arrive dry. There is a second element in the hinge, and it belongs to Lucht rather than Luttwitz. St. Vith was to be in German hands on the evening of December 17th. It held until the 21st. That is 4 days in which the eastern end of the northern route stayed shut, which meant that the traffic Manteuffel needed to push forward to his own spearhead was competing on the southern roads with the traffic of a corps that had nowhere else to go. Manteuffel, Cole notes, was anxious to free the 66th Corps and hurry it forward to the Somme River sector. He could not, because the town was still American. 2 towns, then, one held by a division that had been in the line 5 days, one by an armored combat command that arrived the day after the attack started. Between them, they took the timetable apart, and a timetable was the only thing this operation had instead of reserves. Now the figures, side by side. Establishment first. Cole gives the 6th Panzer Army's 4 armored divisions about 500 tanks and armored assault guns, including 90 Tigers, the Mark VI. Caddick-Adams gives Manteuffel's whole army, 3 corps, over 90,000 men, 963 guns, and almost 300 tanks and assault guns. 4 armored divisions against 3, and 5 tanks in the north for every 3 in the center on the narrower front, by division. Piper's battle group of the 1st SS Panzer Division had an available armored strength on December 16th of about 100 tanks, split evenly between the Mark IV and the Panther, plus 42 Tigers of the 501st SS Panzer Detachment. Manteuffel's strongest division, the 2nd Panzer, went in with 27 Panzer IVs, 58 Panthers, and 48 assault guns. The 116th Panzer reported on December 10th, 26 Panzer IVs, 43 Panthers, and 25 Jagdpanzer IVs, of which 13 were combat-ready. Fuel. By December 16th, the German quartermaster and rail systems had put the promised 4,680,000 gallons into the hands of OB West. The armored divisions carried, in their vehicles and trains, enough for perhaps 90 to 100 miles of normal cruising. Manteuffel's claim, made to Basil Liddell Hart and printed in the German General's Talk, is that he asked for 5 times the standard scale of petrol for winter conditions and was given 1.5 times. Ammunition. Hitler allotted 100 trains from the Special Führer Reserve. On December 13th, Army Group B held 15,099 tons in its dumps, against a planned consumption that Army Group B's own logisticians put at about 1,200 tons a day. Ground. The greatest depth of the German penetration, achieved on the 10th day of the attack, was about 60 airline miles, and it was in the 5th Panzer Army's zone. By December 18th, the base of the salient had stabilized at a width of 47 airline miles, narrower than the plan required. The 6th Panzer Army's spearhead, on the evening of December 18th, was within some 3 miles of Werbemont, and Werbemont is not the Meuse. Cost. During the operation east of the Meuse, the 2nd Armored Division took 1,213 prisoners and captured or destroyed 82 tanks, 83 guns, and 441 vehicles. Its own armor losses were 5 light tanks and 22 mediums. American battle casualties reported from December 16th through January 2nd, on returns Cole flags as probably incomplete, were 41,315 officers and men, 4,138 known killed, 20,231 wounded, 16,946 missing. The 2 American armies lost 471 medium tanks in the last half of December. German losses cannot be stated the same way, and Cole says so. What all this cost the Wehrmacht, he writes, is impossible to say. The measures he offers are indirect. About 67,000 troops were evacuated from the Army Group B area by rail during December, a figure that includes casualties from the earlier fighting around Aachen and disease cases. For divisions continuously engaged from the 17th onward, he estimates between 2,000 and 3,000 combat effectives lost per division. One more figure sets the frame around all of them. Of the armored complement on the entire Western Front, 2,567 tanks and assault guns, Army Group B and the OKW Reserve had been given 2,168. This was not an offensive that was starved. It was an offensive whose weight was put in the wrong place. The decisions, then, and the men who made them. Hitler decided the objective, and he decided the weight. Antwerp was his, and he never let it go. Through Rundstedt's objections, through models, through the small solution papers, through 6 weeks of staff argument. The 6th Panzer Army was his as well. The SS divisions had been pulled out of the line in September and given to a new headquarters, under a commander from his own bodyguard, and the operation was then written so that this army would set the pace. He also kept the decision on where the 5th Panzer Army would throw its weight, which is why a colonel commanding a division at Kels could not get a battle group pulled back without a ruling from East Prussia. Jodl and the OKW staff decided the shape of the operation on paper, including the fuel calculation. Manteuffel's view of that staff is on record, and it is his view, not a finding. Keitel, Jodl, and Vorlemont, he said, had never been in the war, and their lack of fighting experience tended to make them underrate the practical difficulties. Rundstedt decided very little of it, and has carried the name of it ever since. The Americans called this the Rundstedt Offensive at the time, and a good deal of the popular literature still does. He argued against the scope, he was overruled, and O.B. West's function during the operation was to pass on decisions taken above it. If you want a single measure of how the German command system worked in its last winter, it is that the field marshal who opposed the plan is the one the attack was named after. Model decided nothing about the objective and a great deal about the execution. He pressed for the limited option and lost. Then he ran the battle, and it was Model who ordered St. Vith taken on the 18th, and Model who had to live with the fact that it was not. Dietrich decided the routes in the north and the priorities inside his own army. When his infantry failed to open the gap on the first morning, the armor that had been given first call on everything sat on its start line and waited for a hole that was not coming. Lusch decided to keep 2 Volksgrenadier divisions on the Schnee Eifel pocket while St. Vith stayed open. That is defensible in that it produced 7,000 prisoners. It is expensive in that it cost 4 days on the one road his army needed. Luttwitz decided the ultimatum, and he decided the split at Bastogne. Kokot's grenadiers and part of Panzer Lehr to the ring, Lauchert's tanks to the west. That split is the reason Manteuffel's name is on the deepest penetration, and the reason the deepest penetration had nothing behind it. Laucher decided, correctly and too late to matter, that his forward battle groups were finished, and was overruled. And Manteuffel decided the method, the silent sector on the north flank, the infiltration detachments, the searchlights, the pre-dawn jump-off. Kohl's phrasing, in the epilogue, is that probably at Manteuffel's instigation, Hitler finally agreed that a short, sharp pre-dawn artillery preparation would be used in the Ardennes. He also decided, on the ground and against the shape of his orders, to let Bastogne go. Now, the analysis, and it is about documents, I think the single most useful document in this story is the one the United States Army commissioned itself, and I think it has to be read against the order of battle rather than with it. In manuscript B, 151A, Manteuffel sets out the allocation as he understood it, and his own arithmetic is the cleanest statement of the disparity anyone has written. The 6th Panzer Army, he records, was to rush forward on the crossings of the Meuse on both sides of Liège with 4 SS Panzer divisions for the assault and 5 infantry divisions, 9 large units. His own army, by his account, had 4 Panzer divisions for the assault and 3 infantry divisions, 7. Here's the problem with using that as evidence. 4 Panzer divisions is the planning figure, not the force. What crossed the hour on the 16th under 5th Panzer Army was 3 Panzer divisions, 2nd Panzer, Panzer Lehr, and the 116th, with the 9th Panzer Division arriving late in the month, and the Führer-Begleit Brigade arriving as a reserve, not as a division. The manuscript is describing what he was promised. That distinction is the central difficulty with the foreign military studies as a source class, and it is not a matter of dishonesty. The historical division asked these men to reconstruct operations from memory, without their war diaries, years after the fact, in a program that Caddick-Adams notes helped rebuild German military self-confidence at a moment when that confidence had a use to the people commissioning the work. Manteuffel wrote the first of his in custody at Allendorf. I think the fuel claim is the weakest single element of Manteuffel's post-war account, and I think the document that settles it is a quartermaster return rather than a general's recollection. The claim, in Liddell Hart's The German General's Talk, is that he asked for 5 times the standard scale and got 1.5. Kohl's figure from the German supply side is that the promised total was in O.B. West's hands by the 16th. Both statements can be true, and they are not describing the same problem. The fuel existed. It was east of the Rhine, and moving it forward required the same roads that were carrying 3 Corps west. Koschenhausen's tanks at Celle were not short of fuel because Germany had none. They were short of fuel because the road behind them ran past Bastogne, and Bastogne was American. I think Kohl's official history is a better source on the comparison between the 2 armies than any German account of it, and the reason is structural. Kohl had no stake in the answer. He states the design, that the 6th Panzer Army represented the main effort, and that its 4 SS Panzer divisions were expected to pace the counteroffensive. And then he states the result, without ever assembling the 2 into an argument. He also gives 6 reasons the offensive failed, and every one of them is about time. American defense more tenacious than anticipated. Support and transport not keeping pace, roads congested, flanks not brought forward, build up inside the salient too slow, American reserves committed faster than expected. Not one of them is about the quantity of German armor. I think the ranks in this battle are less settled than the accounts make them look, and that is worth saying out loud on a channel that corrects other people's ranks. Caddick-Adams has Meinrad von Lauchert as an Oberst, a colonel, when he takes over the 2nd Panzer Division on the 15th of December. Several standard reference works have him as a general major across the same weeks. Cole gives the commander of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division as General Major Hoffmann Schönborn, and other accounts of St. Vith give the same man as a colonel. I have used the lower rank in both cases because the promotion evidence I can actually see supports it, and because a channel that runs on documents should say when the documents are thin rather than pick the grander title. I think the German casualty figure for this offensive cannot be given, and I think Cole was right to decline it rather than estimate. He writes that what it cost the Wehrmacht is impossible to say, and then offers rail evacuations in a per-division range instead. Every round total you will see quoted for German losses in the Ardennes is built downstream of that gap, and the size of the gap is the reason those totals differ from each other by tens of thousands. I think the deepest penetration claim needs the qualifier Cole attaches to it, and the qualifier is the substance rather than a footnote. The force at Foy-Notre-Dame was a reconnaissance battalion and part of an artillery column. Behind it, around Cels, was Koschenhausen, with a tank battalion that could not maneuver. That is not an army 4 miles from a river crossing. It is the sharp end of an army whose body was still strung back along a road to Bastogne. What happened on Christmas Day settles the question of what that spearhead could have done to the Dinant bridges, and the answer is nothing. And I think the comparison in the title is fair on the record. With one correction, the record itself supplies. The 5th Panzer Army did not get further because it was better led in some general sense. It got further because it was aimed at a thinner part of the American line, because its army commander had personally gone forward and found out when the American foxholes were empty, and because it was allowed to bypass what the 6th Panzer Army had to fight through. The northern shoulder around Elsenborn held from the first morning. The southern one bent. That is terrain in American dispositions as much as it is generalship, and any account that leaves it out is selling something. What the record contains is this: 2 Panzer armies attacked at 0530 hours on December 16th, 1944. The one designated as the main effort with 4 SS Panzer divisions, about 500 tanks and assault guns and the heavier artillery on the narrower front, failed to open its breach on the first morning and never reached the Meuse. The one designated to protect its flank with 3 Panzer divisions, fewer than 300 tanks and assault guns and 963 guns, crossed the hour a day late, took St. Vith 4 days late, captured 7,000 men on the Schnee Eifel, masked Bastogne, took an American Bailey Bridge on an American supply road, and put a reconnaissance battalion within 4 or 5 miles of the Dinant bridges on the night of December 23rd, with no fuel to go the rest of the way. On the 25th, the 2nd Armored Division destroyed it. The offensive was called off in January, and the ground was given back by the end of the month. Manteuffel commanded the 3rd Panzer Army from March 1945 and surrendered to British forces at Hagenau on the 3rd of May. He was released from Allied captivity, Caddick Adams says, in 1947. He sat in the Bundestag from 1953 to 1957 as a defense spokesman for the Free Democrats, and he advised on the building of the Bundeswehr. In 1959, a West German court convicted him of ordering the execution of a soldier in 1944 and sentenced him to a term the published accounts give as 18 months. Dietrich was sentenced to life imprisonment at the Malmedy trial and released in October of 1955. The manuscript is still in the file at 189 pages, and the army it describes is still the one that got closest to the river. That's what the record shows. The sources are in the description. I'll see you in the next one.